Oh. Dobry den, dobry večer, vitajmo. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fulbright Ukraine and Kolo Fulbrightsky Ukrainsky Associacja. We would like to note today that it's been a very critical day in Kyiv. We wanted to gather in person, but we're here online and this is being recorded. So please post it, circulate to your friends and your networks afterward, and feel free to reach out with questions, comments, whatever you think of at a later time as well. Today we have an amazing author with us, Jenn Blatty, whose book, Snapshots Sent Home from Afghanistan, Iraq, and Ukraine, a memoir, is now available worldwide in both print and ebook form, in English, and in the future in Ukrainian. Today, we have also an incredible translator with us, Tatiana Savichinska. I want to tell you a little bit first about each of these wonderful, talented women, and then we will get into the book itself and have a conversation about the content in this incredible memoir and the people in the book that it is about. J.T. Blatty is a photojournalist. She's the author of this book, as I mentioned. She's also the author of a couple of other books. One of them is called Fish Town, which is about the fishing communities in and around New Orleans, Louisiana, the bayou where she is from originally. Like many post 9/11 combat veterans, JT struggled to regain her sense of purpose in the first years returning home, but then a chance meeting with a West Point classmate in 2018 changed her trajectory. He was taking part in an international summit in Ukraine to help develop the Ministry of Veteran Affairs and invited JT to tag along. That's where the book begins, and we're going to get there pretty soon. I want to also tell you that JT is a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, graduated in 2000. She served 6 years as an active duty U.S. Army officer deployed with the first troops into Afghanistan following 9/11, and again in Iraq during Operation Iraqi Freedom. After completing her U.S. military service, she pursued photography and writing as a career and has worked as a regular contributor for Connecticut Savannah Magazine, New Orleans Advocate, and FEMA Disaster Reservist Photographer, which is our federal agency for disaster response in the U.S. Following her internship with National Geographic Traveler, she has been documenting a lot of different things, but most importantly, the conflict in Ukraine, now war, a large-scale war in Ukraine, creating photographic and audio archives of the volunteer battalions of the Donbass going back to 2014, capturing oral history and portraits on the front line in bunkers and forests and in Kyiv flats. Her Frontline Peace Life exhibit, as it is called, shares the stories of the revolutionaries who self-deployed during the original Russian insurgency into the Donbass region in 2014 and have saved Ukraine's independence. The collection has been exhibited in Chicago and New York City in 2019-2020 and was scheduled to open March 2022 in Kyiv. It's only a delay. It will happen. JT has attended multiple writing residencies in Europe. She has received a 2021-2022 Ukraine Fulbright Scholarship, which we are most proud of. She is an alumna of ours. We are proud to support Jenn in all of her activities. I also now would like to tell you about our incredible translator and alumna as well, Fulbright alumna Tatiana Savichinska. She is a translator of war literature and has translated multiple books. She is currently teaching writing and translation at Ukrainian Catholic University. She has an MA in comparative literature from Dartmouth College, and that was on her Fulbright that she earned that degree. She was a 2019 resident at Banff International Literary Translation Center in Alberta, Canada. I'm familiar with that residency. It's a wonderful one, very prestigious. And her published projects include Kazu Igushuro's, pardon me if I'm not saying correctly, The Buried Giant and Madeleine Dines do not say we have nothing. Her writing and translations into English have appeared in Los Angeles Review of Books and Asymptote magazine. In 2023, she participated in a BCLT International Literary Translation and Creative Writing Summer School led by Elena Jennings. So thank you, Tatiana, for your talent. Now, let's turn to the book. Let's open first into a chapter of this book in the author's own voice. And Jenn, maybe you can provide us with one or two sentences for context. Oh, you're muted.
Of course, again. I said, which one are we doing?
The silence in the quarry trench.
Okay. Background of this excerpt is returning to the frontline positions before the full-scale invasion not long before the full-scale invasion, maybe 3 months before, in November of 2021. I think that's really all the background information that's needed for it.
Yeah,
Besides
sure.
that, yeah, okay. See if I have enough light here. In the silence of standing in a quarry trench, it's almost as if the air is gone, sucked into a white noise, even though I'm still breathing perfectly fine. It gives way to sounds that are often muted by the chaos of everyday life. Sounds carried from kilometers away. A military tarp blowing in the wind, dogs barking from a distant frontline village, the muffled voices of soldiers, boots crunching against broken rocks, the unbalanced planks of wood teetering under the weight of soldiers crossing over the mud puddles. Even the distant vibrations and blasts of artillery and the faint popping of gunfire are a comfort in this place. We hiked through the Donbass after days of November rain to reach the positions at the top of the Quarry Mountains, moving along the caked-up mud, the sunken tire tracks on a dirt road already warped by farming vehicles. Breathing, lungs, my weight tripled by the inches of quicksand earth mercilessly clinging to my feet. It was a reminder of how easy it was to fall into a kind of comfortable, the kind where one forgets that he or she may need to run to preserve life. So, where do you want to go? Ira had asked me the previous day. Ira, the unofficial 93rd Brigade press officer, clearly ran the operations for her team. She was the only press officer I wasn't hesitant to work with over the years, beginning with the first time she picked me up at the train station in Volnovakha, which I realized was only in a metaphoric sense as she wheeled up on a bicycle. But she always found a way to support the ideas I was after, finding ways to circumvent or barrel through the rules and bureaucracy that often worked against them. Her question was appropriate because I normally have an agenda for her, a longer form story to develop over multiple trips to the front line. The coexistence of farmers working the sunflower, corn, and wheat fields adjacent to the soldiers in trenches, the reality of oligarchs and industry on both sides of the border dictating the schedule of artillery falling, the 2014 volunteers still serving on the front line, stuck in the should I stay or should I go mentality, or the transparency of where the billion-dollar U.S. support packages to Ukraine were going, because they certainly weren't visible on the front line. Soldiers were still buying their own weapons, cars, and often their own uniforms, in lieu of the upgraded and newly designed pixels the Ministry of Defense proudly issued them, pretty for standing in a parade and in tatters a month later. But a story wasn't my ambition that day. I didn't really have any ambitions past the need to escape the peace life in Kyiv, where even I began feeling detached from the reality of war, no matter the proximity. Soldiers continued to die each week. It felt as if it were happening in another world, another time, so far away and removed from my existence. Like when I left the army, it was so easy to forget about it all. Once I was away from Afghanistan, from Iraq, and even before I left the service, the death counts just became death counts, statistics and numbers without faces and stories. Just a few more moments in the quarry trench, leaning against the wall, taking it all in. I let the other journalist, a reporter out of Western Ukraine, walk far away through the maze of trenches to cover the soldiers manning the big guns, asking what they thought of the recent news, the escalation of troops again on the other side of the border. Were they prepared and ready? Take your time. I'm content in this place without the rush and competition. As nice as he was, it felt as though he were an invading tourist. Because the disconnect wasn't only about the war's reality. It was a disconnect from a place, from a world, from a people, of real and raw and simplicity, where no one knows what you're doing, where you are, except the people who are there with you. No external obligations back home, paperwork, bureaucracy, phones, only stay in the moment, because there's nothing more important than that moment. Being in Kyiv too long became very much the way Valera had explained it from the forest floor in Popasna. This focus on the trivial, being surrounded by a proclaimed attachment to an unshared experience, fighting and working against one another instead of focusing on the simplicities we find when working together to stay alive. I revert to the bunker under the earth, the kitchen area, the sleeping quarters, the downtime caves, back to where a puppy and 2 kittens stalk the chow table for handouts of government cheese and sausage slices, or if they're lucky, a prized piece of meat from unfinished borscht or soup. I photograph a white cat who pushes himself against the soldier, resting and smoking a cigarette near the tarp opening. If any soldiers on the front line had disliked animals in their past, I found it hard to believe any of them could avoid conversion. They soften the hardest of spirits. The unit cook emerges from the kitchen area and hands me a cup of tea, my hand burning while the plastic essentially molds to my skin under the heat. I rested on the table to cool off and noticed the young soldier who dodged our path earlier, running off to some faraway corner out of view. I watch him clean a rifle under a lamplight, methodically, a calming motion, and listen to the sounds of the metal rod pushing through the barrel. Can I take a few shots? He nods without looking, and somewhere in the frame, as his comrades play with him and throw banter over his shyness, I catch a smile. He was dead the next day.
Okay, Tatiana, maybe you can jump in.
Yeah, sure. I'll now read the same excerpt in Ukrainian. Листопад 2021 року. Новотроїцьке, Україна. Коли стоїш у тиші кар'єрної траншеї, складається враження, неначе повітря щезає, поглинуте білим шумом, хоча я й далі можу дихати. Тут гучнішають звуки, що часто приглушуються хаосом щоденного життя. Звуки, які доносяться за кілометри. Брезент, що розвивається на вітрі, гавкіт собак з далекого прифронтового села, приглушені голоси військових, порипування чобіт об розбите каміння, дерев'яні дошки, що хитаються під вагою солдатів, які переходять брудну калюжу. В цьому місці заспокоюють навіть далекі вібрації вибухи артилерії і відлуння пострілів. Ми долали болота Донбасу після багатоденних листопадових дощів, щоб дістатися до позицій на висотах кар'єру, рухаючись по липкій багнюці, яка вкривала запалі сліди від шин на ґрунтовій дорозі, що її вже давно розбила сільськогосподарська техніка. І легені, і моя вага немов збільшилися утричі через товстий шар землі, що нещадно чіплялася за підошву. Це було нагадуванням про те, наскільки ж легко піддатися комфорту, що дозволяє забути про необхідність тікати, аби вижити. «Куди б ти хотіла піти?» – запитала Іра напередодні. Вона була неофіційною пресофіцеркою 93-ї бригади і явно тут усім керувала. За багато років вона була єдиною пресофіцеркою, з якою мені завжди хотілося працювати, ще відколи вона вперше підібрала мене на вокзалі в Волновасі. Хоча підібрала лише метафорично, оскільки під'їхала на велосипеді. Але вона завжди охоче підтримувала мої ідеї, знаходячи способи обійти або проламати правила і бюрократію, які часто їм суперечили. Її питання було цілком доречне, оскільки зазвичай у мене був план дій і мета, наприклад, підготувати розлогий репортаж, для якого доведеться безліч разів з'їздити в прифронтову зону. Теми бували різними. Співіснування фермерів, що вирощують соняшник, кукурудзу і пшеницю на полях, які прилягали до позицій військових у траншеях, як реальність олігархів і промисловості по обидва боки кордону диктує графік артилерійських обстрілів. Добровольці, що пішли воювати у 2014 році й досі перебували на фронті, вагаючись, чи продовжувати далі, чи ні. Або ж прозорість того, куди йдуть мільярдні пакети американської допомоги, оскільки на фронті від них не було й сліду. Військові й далі самі купували зброю, автівки і часто навіть форму замість оновленого пікселю, який їм гордо видало Міністерство оборони, але яке годилося хіба для участі у параді, а вже через місяць носіння перетворювалось на лахміття. Але того дня я не мала на меті писати репортаж. У мене взагалі не було жодної мети, окрім потреби втекти з мирного Києва, де навіть я почала почуватися відірваною від реальності війни, хоч та і велася зовсім недалеко. Щотижня гинули солдати. Це немов відбувалося в іншому світі, в іншому часі, дуже далеко від мого життя. Так легко було просто про все забути, як і тоді, коли я звільнилася з армії. Коли Афганістан і Ірак залишилися далеко позаду, і навіть ще до того, як я облишила військову службу, кількість загиблих стала лише кількістю загиблих. Вона перетворилась на статистику і числа, без облич і історій. Мені хотілося ще бодай кілька хвилин отак простояти у траншеї, спершись об стіну, оглядаючись і прислухаючись. Колега-журналіст, репортер з Західної України, пішов далі лабіринтом траншей, щоб підготувати сюжет про солдатів, які стріляли з великокаліберної зброї, і запитати їхню думку щодо останніх новин про скупчення військ по той бік кордону, і чи готові вони до ескалації. «Нехай собі йде», – подумала я. «Мені подобається стояти тут, без поспіху і конкуренції». Хоча той журналіст і поводився приязно, але було відчуття, ніби він тут непроханий турист. Тому що ця прірва стосувалася не лише реальності війни. Це була прірва, що віддаляла мене від світу і від людей, від справжньої первісної простоти, коли ніхто, окрім тих, з ким стоїш пліч-опліч, не знає, що ти робиш і де. Жодних зовнішніх обов'язків удома, жодних документів, бюрократії чи телефонів. Лише ця мить. Тому що немає нічого важливішого, аніж ця мить. Коли я надовго затримувалася в Києві, то почувалася так, як це описував Валєра, припавши до землі в лісах Попасної. Оця одержимість буденністю і відчуття, що всі хочуть бути причетними до чужого досвіду, і ці міжособиці замість того, щоб зосередитися на простих речах, що їх ми знаходимо, коли працюємо разом, аби вижити. Я повернулася до бліндажа під землею, де готували їсти, спали і відпочивали, де цуценя і два кошенята не зводили очей зі спільного столу, сподіваючись, що їм перепаде шматок сиру чи ковбаси, або, якщо пощастить, шматок м'яса з недоїденого борщу чи супу. Я сфотографувала білого кота, що терся об військового, який саме відпочивав, викурюючи сигарету біля дірки в брезенті. Навіть якщо хтось з військових у минулому не надто любив тварин, важко повірити, що серед них ще досі були такі. Поруч з тваринами лагіднішали навіть найсуворіші. З приміщення, де готувалася їжа, вийшов кухар підрозділу і пригостив мене чаєм. Чай був такий гарячий, аж я опекла руку, і пластик немов прилип до шкіри під дією тепла. Я поставила чай на стіл, щоб той вистиг, і помітила молодого солдата, з яким уже перетиналася раніше, коли він, помітивши нас, побіг у якийсь куток, подалі з очей. Я дивилась, як він методично і спокійно чистить автомат під лампою, дослухаючись, як шомпол пронизує ствол. «Можна я сфотографую?» Він кивнув, не підіймаючи очей. І в одному кадрі, коли побратими почали кепкувати з хлопця через його сором'язливість, мені навіть вдалося уловити його усмішку. Наступного дня він загинув.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen and Tanya, for reading this segment. I wanted to pause and reflect and ask JT a couple of questions about this incredible image and also creation of a kind of world. So throughout the book, there is a sense of moving between what JT refers to as the peace life and the world of war. And here, I think in this selection from the book, the components of this world, this sort of forest world in which the war is taking place, are illustrated through contrasts such as silence and noise. Throughout this selection, we hear muffled sounds of voices, the faint popping of gunfire that becomes a comfort in this place, because it is a surreal also world of war that you create throughout this book. And I was wondering if you might tell us a little bit about how components of the world here, like time, are marked for you, and maybe the role of nature and the environment here, because there's this very strong paragraph about halfway through this chapter where you say the disconnect wasn't only about the war's reality, it was a disconnect from a place, from a world, from a people of real and raw simplicity, where no one knows what you're doing, where you are, except the people who are there with you. And then you say you're away from paperwork, bureaucracy, only in the moment, because there is nothing more important than that moment. Being in Kyiv too long became much the way Valera explained it from the forest floor in Popasna. This focus on the trivial, fighting and working against one another in that world, but versus this world. So I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your creation of this surreal world of war that you enter into in this book in Ukraine. And what was it like for you, for example, to enter Ukraine and to encounter people like the young soldier here who disappear so quickly? That I know that that's a loaded question. There's really no answer, one answer. It's kind of a description.
Version.
When did you write this selection? Was it in the
Right
beginning?
Right
Right
after
after you entered Ukraine?
No. I wrote that chapter right after, probably not very long after I left the Quarry Trench, those positions.
In 2021. So you had been to Ukraine for a few years already, because you were in Ukraine as early as 2018.
Right. So that was like year 3. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you at this point knew somebody for the audience, Valera. Who is Valera? Can you share for our audience?
Valera is from a previous chapter in 2019. One of the original 2014 volunteers that I met in Kyiv. He was in IDAR volunteer battalion and then went on to the regular armed forces. But I met him in the beginning in 2018 because a lot of the characters, people in my book are actually from the IDAR volunteer battalion. And when I met him, I knew I wanted to interview him. So I went to him in Popasna finally the next year to interview him and make his portrait. But that is a reference to him. And we talked a lot during that time. And the audience said, this was before the full-scale invasion, which changed a lot of things, like a lot of the disconnect between the front line and the peace life. Because as we all know, as air sirens are going off right now in Kyiv, that all of Ukraine is subject to being a front line now, which has brought a lot of people together of the experience of war, of struggle. Not to say that it's good, but that is the one upside of this horrible time. Is that we've people have become more together and unified, whether you're a civilian or a soldier or a veteran. But during that time with Valera, interviewing him, he was very much struggling in transition. He didn't like being in Kyiv. He just wanted to be on the front line because he felt completely disconnected from the peace life, from the civilian world, in that place where people were fighting, people were caring about the trivial, just. Yeah.
And what about the geography of the location, Novotroitsky? Where is Novotroitsky in Ukraine? And is it under occupation or is it still sovereign?
It is under occupation right now. Novotroitsky? Yeah, yes, it's occupied. Yeah. As well as the bottom. Yeah. I mean, a lot of it, I would say 90% of the areas I write about in this book are occupied.
And in writing, were you taking notes while you were,
No.
involved? Because the level of detail throughout the book is really impressive. Your memory is serving you very well throughout the book, including all of the sections on Afghanistan and Iraq, which I know from conversations that we've had, you wrote a little bit longer after they had happened, right? So in 2021, when you wrote this chapter, it was probably a year. It was right after, but some of the other chapters, there's more of a temporal delay between when you wrote them and when they're dated. It seems that
Not
you
too
have.
much. Like some of them were actually altered. Like a lot of those chapters from Afghanistan, for example, Pitch Black, when I talk about the landing, I probably wrote that within a year after
Mhm,
coming home. So it wasn't
mhm, mhm.
very long after. I wrote a lot of those earlier chapters, or at least the roots of them back then. And I might have
And
altered them or made them fit this story more, or
mhm,
updated them, but I was trying to keep my original voice from that time, because I hope that
mhm.
it has come through that I am like 23 years old a lot of these older chapters,
Yes.
like the feast,
Sure, sure, sure. Which is an incredible chapter. I recommend for all the audience to read The Feast. Wow. But what I wanted to also ask for others here to know about, did you manage to record Valera's voice?
Oh yeah, I've recorded Valera. Yeah, so a lot of within the book, there's some of these audio excerpts from my oral history interviews, which is this book is about this project documenting these volunteer soldiers, taking their portraits and recording 2 to maybe 4 hour audio history or oral history stories. So
Mhm.
sometimes I have them quoted within a chapter, and sometimes they're standalone excerpts, like just paste within the book. But yeah, Valera told me that, yes, I recorded him saying these things on the forest floor in Vipassana. Yes.
So in many ways, the text from the book is part of a larger multimedia project that includes large portraits, recordings,
Yeah.
oral history, interviews. There are a lot of components here that you can see through the text. So I want us to turn to another selection that is really illustrative of JT's process as an author, and as she notes in the text we're going to turn to right now, the importance of sound for her as an artist. So if we can, Jenn, if you would read for us your chapter Voices.
Yes, I will. This one is a little harder, so I'll try to make it through. This March 2023, Kyiv, Ukraine. I'm a photographer, but really, I'm just a human drawn towards truth, in snapshots of truth. Sometimes through sight, sometimes through writing, sometimes through capturing ambient sound, and sometimes through recording voices. Voices that speak the truth of a life lived, that can remove differences and borders and racial divides, rather than creating them. Voices that need to be preserved as a truth of history for years to come. Voices that can tell us the stories we regret we never asked. Voices that make you feel as if you're still standing with a person long after they are gone. Before we left for Afghanistan, I bought a small voice recorder and packed it in my footlocker along with packages of ramen, cartons of cigarettes, disposable cameras, and extra rolls of 35mm film. It was the kind you could buy from the small electronics section of a Walgreens or a CVS, an old school portable Sony with microcassette tapes and sound quality that later proved horrible for anything past a voice note. I can't remember why I felt a need to bring one with me, outside of having this perpetual drive to preserve and document everything in my life. And sound was a sense I always felt most connected to. It offered a different dimension of memory and nostalgia that looking at a photograph did not. I didn't use it often when I was there, but when I did, I recorded the ambient sounds surrounding us, the gunfire and explosions, the leadership briefings, the smack talk and banter between my comrades, or even between myself and my soldiers. And sometimes, when alone in the tent, I recorded my own voice, quietly talking to someone on the other side, in the other world, a written letter in voice without rehearsal, a letter that I never sent home. I imagine I was trying to preserve my own voice as a memory for them, just in case I didn't make it home. I never met him, but for some reason felt as if I did in some way. It's hard to explain, the volunteer transcriber of Bijan's recording wrote to me. Beguiled by his voice and story, she followed him on Facebook over the years and must have noticed the months on end of silence, the primary posts on his account coming from his mother during her search for his whereabouts. Her comment reminded me of the earliest years of my project, when strangers from the Ukrainian community around the world volunteered to transcribe and translate the hours on end of audio recordings. I imagine the voices of the volunteers became sealed in their memories, just as they had in my own, intensified by the process of replaying the clips again and again to annotate every single word. The devotion of time required for transcription is often miscalculated by a newcomer. The exhibit in Kyiv was to be the first time we played the voices of the volunteers to the public. But now, instead of listening to them in a museum or an institute while looking at their portraits, I'm sending them to family members and comrades of those who have passed on. Even the in-between moments, the photographic snapshots and snapshots in audio form. Bijan and Bye-Bye and even Valkyrie playing guitar and singing, the celebration and banter between all of us together, the subtle nuances and details of a voice that makes each human unique. The purpose they are serving was unattended, and to be brutally honest, beyond painful at times. Because never did I imagine a day when I'd stand in a Kyiv cemetery and watch the procession line at Bijan's funeral, throwing handfuls of dirt in a grave beneath a portrait I made of him cradling his guitar. But it's the kind of purpose my work can serve in the moment without misinterpretation, and it's quite possibly much larger than I ever imagined, in a way that I might have imagined the purpose of recording my voice in Afghanistan, played in the times when we are overtaken in fear that we've forgotten the sound of a loved one's voice. But even before the invasion abandoned the opening, it had already become clear that the message I wanted to share might never break through the sound barrier in a country where the war was such a life force. It's irrelevant, at least now, because the one purpose I thought it might serve is no longer relevant. The divide between the front line and the peace life has been compressed through a struggle of war that's now been experienced by Ukrainians across the boundaries of what was once considered the peaceful life. And the divide between the veteran and soldier community, they were once again brought together by their shared fight, even though it might fall apart in time. Once the moment of coming together runs further and further from our memories, once the war smooths out and converges into not a full-scale invasion, but into the same never-ending war that began almost 10 years ago, tangled in politics and bureaucracy, only now with a twisted and elevated sense of what's normal or should be expected in a 21st century war. Regardless of the exhibit or publication opportunities, I'm content in realizing my work, my contributions don't really have a finish line. It's not something for the immediate moment, but something that becomes appreciated by the smallest few in different moments, like those snapshots and handwritten letters in Ziploc bags. And maybe it will be appreciated by the larger few years and years later, a testament of truth in war that connects all those who experience war.
Thank you. Tatiana.
Sure, I'll now read the same excerpt in Ukrainian. Голоси. Березень 2023 року. Київ, Україна. Я фотографиня, хоча насправді я лише людина, яку тягне до правди, до кадрів правди. Іноді через побачене, іноді через написане, а іноді через довколишні звуки чи записи голосів. Голосів, що розповідають правду прожитого життя, що можуть стирати відмінності, кордони і расові розбіжності, а не створювати їх. Голосів, які потрібно зберігати як правду історії на майбутні роки. Голосів, які можуть нам розповісти історії, про які, на жаль, ми так і не встигли розпитати. Голосів, завдяки яким почуваєшся, що людина досі поруч, навіть коли її вже давно немає. Перш ніж ми вирушили в Афганістан, я купила маленький диктофон і спакувала його разом з пачками лапші рамен, блоками сигарет, одноразовими камерами і запасною 35-мм плівкою. Такий диктофон можна було купити в відділі дрібної електроніки Walgreens чи CVS. Це був олдскульний портативний Sony з мікрокасетами і якістю звуку, яка, як потім виявилося, годилася хіба для голосових нотаток. Я не пам'ятаю, чому відчула гостру потребу взяти його з собою, окрім незмінного прагнення зберегти і задокументувати геть усе в моєму житті. А ще звук був чуттям, з яким я відчувала особливо міцний зв'язок, оскільки лише звук дозволяв відчути інший вимір пам'яті і ностальгії, якого бракувало фотографії. Я не так часто ним користувалася під час тієї поїздки, а коли все щось записувала, то це переважно були довколишні звуки, постріли і вибухи, брифінги командирів, теревені між побратимами і посестрами, або навіть між мною і моїми солдатами. Іноді, коли я залишалася у наметі наодинці, то записувала власний голос, тихо розмовляючи з кимось, хто був по той бік, у тому іншому світі. Це був немов лист, який я записала лише голосом, без репетиції, лист, який я так і не надіслала додому. Мабуть, я намагалася закарбувати свій голос як пам'ять для близьких на випадок, якщо не повернуся додому. Ми не знайомі, але в мене було таке враження, ніби ми давно знаємося. Це важко пояснити, написала мені волонтерка, яка транскрибувала запис біжана. Її так зачарував його голос і історія, що вона почала стежити за ним на Фейсбуці і, мабуть, помітила, коли він місяцями нічого не писав, і всі пости на його сторінці були лише від матері, яка його шукала. Її коментар нагадав мені про перші роки мого проєкту, коли незнайомці з української громади по всьому світу зголосилися транскрибувати і перекладати багатогодинні аудіозаписи. Я уявляла, як голоси добровольців закарбовуються у їхніх спогадах, так само, як свого часу у моїх, оскільки записи потрібно було прослуховувати знову і знову, аби записати кожнісіньке слово. Новачки часто недооцінювали, скільки часу їм знадобиться на транскрибування. Виставка в Києві мала стати першою нагодою для широкого загалу почути записи голосів добровольців. Але зараз, замість того, щоб прослуховувати ці записи у музеї чи інституті, дивлячись на їхні портрети, я надсилаю ці записи рідним і побратимам тих, хто відійшов у вічність. Надсилаю геть усе, навіть наші паузи, фотокадри й аудіокадри, на яких Біжан, Бабай і навіть Валькірія грають на гітарі і співають. Наші теревені і сміх, усі особливості й деталі голосу, які роблять кожну людину унікальною. Я робила ці записи не для тієї мети, яку вони зараз виконують, і від якої, правду кажучи, мені буває нестерпно боляче. Тому що я й уявити не могла, що одного дня стоятиму на одному з київських кладовищ і дивитимусь на процесію, яка прийшла провести Біжана в останню путь, і що кидатиму жменю землі на могилу під портретом, на якому він тримає гітару, і який я йому й зробила. Але саме цьому може служити моя робота без ризику бути неправильно сприйнятою. І, ймовірно, її сенс значно більший, аніж я могла будь-коли уявити, як і сенс записувати власний голос в Афганістані, щоб його можна було прослухати у миті, коли нас охоплює страх забути голос дорогої людини. Але ще до того, як відкриття виставки скасувалося через повномасштабне вторгнення, вже стало зрозуміло, що те, що я хотіла сказати, може так ніколи й не бути почутим в Україні, де війна стала такою життєвою силою. Воно не має значення, принаймні зараз, тому що та єдина мета, задля якої це створювалось, уже не актуальна. Прірва між лінією фронту і мирним життям стиснулася через війну, яку тепер відчували українці з усіх сфер, що колись вважалися мирним життям. А прірва між ветеранами і військовими, одні й інші знову стали пліч-опліч у боротьбі зі спільним ворогом. Хоча, можливо, одного дня їхні дороги знову розійдуться, коли момент об'єднання все більше і більше стиратиметься з пам'яті, коли війна згладиться і перетвориться не на повномасштабне вторгнення, а на ту саму нескінченну війну, що почалася майже 10 років тому і оплуталася політикою і бюрократією, лишень тепер з викривленим і гострішим відчуттям того, що вважається нормальним і очікуваним у війні 21-го сторіччя. Хай як би все склалося з виставкою чи публікацією роботи, мені спокійно від думки, що моя праця, мій внесок не має фінішної прямої. Це не щось, що робиться негайно, а щось, що цінується невеликою кількістю людей у різні періоди, як ті знімки і написані від руки листи у пакеті з застіпкою. Можливо, через роки її оцінять інші, як свідчення правди на війні, що об'єднує усіх тих, хто на власному досвіді знає, що таке війна.
A lot to unpack in this selection. I guess I wanted to first give Tanya a chance to weigh in a little bit on her translation process. Were there certain words or phrases that were significant for you in translating this particular passage?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just begin by saying that it was an honor for me to work on this text, and to be honest, what helped me the most was that I had worked as a military interpreter in 2015, 2017 at the training center in Yavoriv in Lviv region. So these were the first years of U.S. troops and Canadian troops training the Ukrainian military, and so the reality that is described. So the reality prior to the full-scale invasion is familiar to me because I spent a lot of time with Ukrainian troops, and it definitely, the terminology that I learned while doing that job definitely helped me. Even the some of the basic things like metal rod, which is very generic term, but I was, when I read it, I was like, yes, I know the exact Ukrainian term for this, because I just remember interpreting something similar at one time. So that experience definitely helped me. And overall, a lot of things that Jenn wrote really resonated with me as someone who both worked with the military prior to the full-scale invasion, and as someone who is now living in the reality of the all-out war with Russia. And yes, so it was an honor to work on this text, and thank you, Jenn, for sharing it with us.
Thank you. I don't take compliments very well. Thank you.
I think in this text, you can really see and feel how the worlds are merging. I mean, not the world of the peace life and the world of the military, but the worlds of, or the world of war, but the experience that you had in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the experience that you felt in Ukraine, that there were similarities between these experiences and the bond that you felt with your fellow soldiers, your fellow defenders, whether they be volunteer soldiers or military, official military. And that's something also that you mentioned in your book that impressed you when you came to Ukraine, that there were so many volunteer defenders. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. What was unique to you when you came to Ukraine in terms of volunteer soldiers?
That's easy.
I mean, yeah, but for a lot of people, it's not until they read your book. I mean, there's so much here. There's so much to unpack. What are some things maybe that you could introduce audiences to that really were significant to you?
When I first came to Ukraine, I was interested, of course, just in the war. It was familiar ground, but I had no idea who these soldiers were. And I started doing my research, and I kept seeing all these terms like volunteer. I'm like, what is a volunteer battalion? And just coming upon learning about the revolution, the Maidan revolution, and how a lot of these people actually came from there, not all of them. But my point is that I come from an army where you take the oath, you're under a contract, you're given veteran benefits, and when they tell you to go to war, you just go to war. The only time that our country, that in my lifetime at least, has felt the experience of being attacked on their own border is 9/11. And the months and everything surrounding that, there was this absolute fear, I think, that we all really felt. And it was like this bringing together, but it's kind of like moved away from our memories. But regardless, the wars that I was sent into, once I came back, I understood that I didn't really understand what the purpose was, like, of being in these other people's countries. And my purpose just became being with my comrades and taking care of my soldiers that I was responsible for. And when I came to Ukraine, just learning about these men and women who are not just fighting because, like, the president, the Yanukovych was inching towards Russia, but they were fighting for their civil rights violations. They wanted their civil rights. They wanted their liberties, their freedom. They wanted to live in peace. And they wanted to fight corruption. They were tired of the system being taken advantage of. And I was just absolutely blown away that these are men and women who are fighting for something tangible, real. It's their purpose. It's coming from within them, and not from a government saying, this is what you need to go do. This is your purpose, which you don't really know if it's true or not. I mean, it's a very clear purpose here. They're going to protect their families, their homes, their land. It's their country. I was just had all the respect about this, which led into this project about just wanting to interview them, and finding out more. But of course, even within all of this, I still find out there is that shared experience between soldiers. Not even though I'm not a volunteer soldier, but there's still this common thread woven between all of us. all that have experienced combat.
I wonder about, the idea of a generation spanning nations. Would you say a lot of the volunteers that you interviewed and you write about in this book are of your same generation? And are the soldiers that appear in the book alongside you in Afghanistan and Iraq, are they also more or less your same generation? I'm reminded a lot in your writing of Svetlana Alexeyevich and Zinky Boys, and I know this is a book that you've read. And I'm just, because she really focuses a lot on the idea of a generation sort of forged through a war, and what that means is also a tragedy. So I was wondering if you might speak to that a little bit, about the idea of
Like
a kind
our
of
generation.
shared.
Like,
Yeah, sure.
we're
Ours.
the post 9/11 generation. I can't speak for other veterans of wars, but I think for a lot of us, over time, we started to kind of come to the same realization that we're not so sure that what we thought we were doing, at least in Afghanistan, wasn't exactly what we were doing, or we weren't doing it the right way, or at least what we told we were doing wasn't really happening. And there was a lot of people like me that had already gone to Afghanistan and then went into Iraq, already kind of had that feeling, I think. I don't know if I'm really answering the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I see a lot here of movement back and forth between your experiences. So in the beginning of this selection in particular, where you're packing your bags with, cigarettes, disposable cameras, and a cassette recorder that you probably can't buy anymore. But
Yep.
maybe back then you could.
I think
It reminds me of my generation and where I was during 9/11, and also the
9/11.
Americans. Yeah, and the Americans who were flying off to war being my age. And I think that something maybe that a lot of folks possibly who didn't grow up in our era, or maybe grew up in the Vietnam era, don't recognize is like the lack of visibility of soldiers, young soldiers in America. It was almost like for years during Iraq and Afghanistan, invisible to a lot of people, unless you were actively protesting the war and following it. It was not it was not a visible presence in society. You didn't see soldiers in uniform on the streets like you do in Ukraine. And what you also mention in this book is the active war on the East happening on the same territory as the peace life in Kyiv, and reintegration of veterans, and the challenges of that disconnect on the same territory. Whereas for Americans, you could leave Iraq and Afghanistan and put oceans between you and the territory of the war.
Yeah.
Maybe you could speak more to some of the challenges of having the war going on the same territory.
So first, one of the things that I found so interesting when I came was I just imagined, because this is again before 2022, before the full-scale invasion, that I was amazed that there was such a disconnect actually between the front line and the peace life in Ukraine. I just assumed that because it's like, if it's a country at war, the entire war must feel it, but that wasn't the case. So speaking to the problem with transition, how can you? It's a war it's your own country. It's like these people who have fought in 14 and 15, I can't tell you how many comrades, the ones who are still alive, how many comrades they've lost. And once it went into the Minsk agreements of the ceasefire in 2015, it's kind of like, I think one of my volunteers, Yevgenia Yanchenko, says it the best, like, it's not, I need to put that quote in the book, but she just says, like, even I thinking about leaving Ukraine, and this is before the invasion, she said, and when I think about this, it's scary, because then what did we fight for? We went out for our hearts, like for our country and all these things we fought for, and nothing is like changing, and it's so complicated for them, because it's this purpose. They thought they had won at the Maidan, and then moving to the front line and losing so much and fighting so much. And it's just been hanging over them in like this cloud and for the 10 years. Like, how can you just leave? Like, hi, you're back in Kyiv and your friends are calling you from the front line. Like, it's not like if your comrades are in Afghanistan, you're going to go take a train over to Afghanistan from the United States. It's just like so accessible. It is so accessible. It's almost impossible to ignore. And even if you try to leave, like I can't tell you how many of these volunteers, they kind of would leave the army. They're like, I'm tired of this because nothing's changing, but they just go crazy. They're like, I got to go back. How can you even start trying to reintegrate or move forward when your purpose, that is a real purpose for you, it's your purpose. Like my purpose in Afghanistan wasn't about my country, I realized later, or Iraq, but for them it is about their country and something they fought so dearly for during Maidan. And probably the Orange Revolution, actually, for other people, like how do you just let that go? You can't. It's your purpose.
Throughout the book, there is a lot of nuance, grappling also with the legacies of the Soviet past. And let's think for a minute about Afghanistan and the history of the US and the USSR. Did that history come up in your conversations with the volunteers that you interviewed, or maybe in Afghanistan? Did you encounter Russia in Afghanistan or USSR remnants? I mean, that's a long war that was going for so long, and it's part of the memoir. What about this ghost of the Soviet past here?
Yeah.
Did you encounter it?
Yeah, absolutely. I just remember being in Afghanistan and in Kandahar, and only really knowing at the time I was 23. They don't give you like some big cultural briefing that really gives you a big history. Although maybe I should have paid more attention at West Point. Maybe they actually told me like a lot of these things and I just had forgotten. But I always just in my mind equated back then is like Soviet is Russian, Soviet is Russian. And in Afghanistan, we knew that the Soviets had been there, but it was like in my mind is the Russians had been here. And when I woke up, I remember that first morning because there was no base there yet. We were building the base. And it was like we had the Northern Alliance and Taliban had just had their last stand against each other. And then we came in. And I called it the War Museum because it really felt like I had just like woken up in this place that had experienced decades of war. And I knew that was the possibility. And when I came to Ukraine, one of the very first, and of course I read Zinky Boys, but it wasn't until I met the first of the former Soviet volunteer soldiers that I interviewed, that's in the book, that was actually a Soviet soldier, that it kind of like just clicked together for me in a more worldly way, more knowledgeable of how connected all wars really are, and how that those weren't just like the relics of Russians in Afghanistan. It was Ukrainians. It could have been any of the former Soviet countries. Like, because here's this guy, he was a Soviet soldier too, and he's Ukrainian. And yes, and I did have war trophies and this bayonet. I always thought it was a Russian bayonet, and then holding it after this first year in Ukraine, I'm like, this could have been a Ukrainian soldiers that, who was sent in on a peacekeeping mission to Afghanistan, kind of like whatever. I kind of felt like our war was supposed to be a little bit of a peacekeeping mission in Afghanistan. At least I thought that's what we would be doing as engineers, like cleaning up what we tore apart. But that's not what it was. So it's a very universal theme right there. I feel like, let's get too political, but it's almost like Russia and the United States like to fight their wars on other people's land.
And in 2022, February 24, tell us where you are and tell us what you wrote. I mean, your audience will read the chapter.
February 22
I want to reflect on where February 24, 2022. You're in Kyiv, right? You're in Kyiv.
No, I'm in Kyiv
Did you leave? Did you stay?
23rd. I'm in Kyiv on February 22nd, 23rd. And I had actually just confirmed the Kyiv exhibit with Natalia. She said, "Hey, are you still?" And let's just say, for reasons that you can read about in the book, I packed up my dog and my rat and drove somewhere. It's like some town called Osleaf. I don't even know where it is. Like I couldn't point to it on a map. It was the only place I could find like a temporary way out. So yes, that's where I was. Yeah.
And who is Valkyrie? In the book, Valkyrie is introduced first.
Valkyria.
Yeah. Tell us who is she in the book?
She is she's one of the most amazing people of the project that I ever interviewed, first of all. I met her at 18 also because I had a fixer for the first year of the project. I said, please, like, I keep hearing about like people who came from Russia to fight against Russia in 2014. He's like, I got one for you, like Valkyrie. So yeah, she was the Russian who left Russia when she was only 18, never went back. Amazing. And yes, like definitely the character throughout the entire book, for sure.
And I think also in February 2022, you were in the process of helping young Afghani women in Kyiv, right? Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you were doing.
Yeah, so that like was a whole other layer of like combining all the wars together before the full-scale invasion. But I suddenly was contacted by a Ukrainian American veteran in the US about these Afghans who just arrived on this emergency flight on that day of the Kabul invasion in the airfield. They were like flight attendants and other families, former contractors for our army. And they ended up somehow just getting on this flight because they were flight attendants. It wasn't like a scheduled one, and they're just like fly, fly, fly. I mean, it's something like out of an absolute movie, okay? And they didn't know where they were going, and they landed in Ukraine. So he called me to be like, please help them. And so yeah, that was and that was in August of 2021, right? Yeah. And man, I felt for them because then it's like they fled one war just to flee another one. But and I definitely was like in communication with them, helping them try to get apply for visas or HP visas for humanitarian parole and contractors as well. And they got out of here though, but they got out the couple of days before the invasion. I said, if you're scared, you should go now. Because that's when I kind of felt something was absolutely happening, was when the entire embassy not only evacuated from like Kyiv to Lviv, but all of a sudden they were all in Poland. Everybody's in Poland. So you know something is happening for real. So it's when I told them you should go now.
There's something very interesting about your style and the way you write, in addition to sound, which we talked about, your images. It's clear that you are a photographer. You say it even in a few places. In the selection we just read, it starts, I'm a photographer. And there's another chapter that also starts out with the same sentence in the book in a different place. But really, I'm just a human drawn toward the truth in snapshots of truth, sometimes through sight, sometimes through writing. At moments, you're wondering as a reader, is this a photographer who writes or a writer who is a photographer? The two inform each other so well. I'm wondering about your sensitivity to the power of images, to media during a war, because you do even have this great segment where you're writing about Iraq and the total, wall between the soldiers and the world of mass media. There's almost no information coming in except what's coming in through the lieutenant. I believe this is the nature of heroism, and heroism seems throughout the book to come up, as a theme connected to the flow of information, whether it's between families and the fallen, or between soldiers on the front line and the world of mass media that's constructing a different war apart from what's actually happening on the ground. You call this the world of the disconnected. I'm wondering if you tell us more about your insights as a photographer to media during a time of war, with the power of media in your work and what you've observed.
Media of photography or?
Yeah, images, how images work together with your texts to create, again, to convey this disconnect between the reality and heroism and the war that is portrayed in the media.
Photography can't do
What
it
is-
alone. Absolutely not. Like, what I believe in is the only thing that can really educate and tell a true story is first-person testimony. And that is the whole reason why I do the audio recordings and why I write my own first-person testimony. A photograph is a photograph. I mean, it is like, it can be a dangerous thing. You put it into the world and it can be completely used and distorted to tell somebody else's story. It can be, it's just like one side of a whole situation. It doesn't take in the account of the actual experience of feeling something. I don't, yes, some imagery is more powerful than others, but in general, it's just, it can be more dangerous than helpful of just being a photographer. It can lead into exhausting people with the same image. It can lead to being pulled and used for propaganda. We want to talk about media. I mean, what terrifies me is how much news there is out there and how much of it is absolutely false and how it is just so easily put into the world. And a lot of times it's like political statements or like our own like politicians who just put things into the air, and they almost like, I think I say this somewhere, but they almost like instigate a reality themselves through their propaganda of what's not happening.
Tanya, would you like to join in? What about translation and images and media? Do you have insights or ideas you want to add to this conversation as well?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's definitely very helpful, and it's a great concept of having this project as a multimedia project, and it's definitely something that helps a lot in translated literature, just because there is more than just one layer that readers perceive, and there is I'm hoping that there would be an uptick in war literature, and especially veteran literature, being translated both from Ukrainian into English and the other way around. And I know that there is an anthology forthcoming from an American publisher. It features diary excerpts and testimonies and essays by women who were volunteers in fighting before the full-scale invasion, and those who serve in the Ukrainian armed forces now. And their perspective is often marginalized because their role had been marginalized historically. It's getting better now, but it is a slow process. So I'm hoping that translation will be one of the means of just understanding that experience. It is, I hope that writing would be a chance for them to not just convey their experience to people who otherwise can't really imagine what they're going through, but also as a space where they can reflect on everything that's happening to them and process the current reality. And so it is my hope that translation will play a part in that process, both translation from Ukrainian into English and from English into Ukrainian.
And you
Absolutely.
have a voice, this book, Voices of War, from 2000. It's kind of like we have our warrior writers anthologies. I know that Ukraine has one called Voices of War that I wish was translated into.
Tell us about warrior writers.
Oh,
we still have a little bit of time before opening the floor for questions, but it would be
Let's
great.
open the door. Well, we're trying to bring that program. I do feel that writing is, it could be used for many things by everyone, and Warrior Writers, it used to be just a veteran writing group that's good. It's still going on online and in-person workshops. And we started to try to bring the program here to Ukraine, facilitate or training new facilitators. And hopefully we're going to really kick that off, soon. But I mean, it's definitely encourages this type of work that, that Tatiana was talking about, that we need more first-person narrative. And even though in Warrior Writers, you are not obliged to share or publish your work, it sometimes ultimately leads. Yeah.
Excellent. We hope to support it at Fulbright as much as we can within our networks. And I would like now to open the floor to anybody from our audiences who might have questions for JT or Tanya.
And you can leave your comments and questions under the stream.
Olga.
I have a sort of philosophical question, probably to Jerry. You are a professional military person. You have a background, military background. You've been to several wars. What's your idea of the role of war for us all? Is it is the desire to fight in the genetic code of people? Where did it come from? I remember that in the book by seminal book by Lakoff and Johnson, the first example of conventional conceptual metaphor is that of argument is war.
Right.
And in fact, he suggested an alternative. So why is it argument is war? It might have been argument is a dance, because there are also two parties who cooperate or who are just working against each other or working together, etc. So is it part of our human nature to fight against one another, or it's something pathological?
Are we talking about Ukraine, or we're talking about
No. I mean generally.
Oh, that's a very philosophical question.
Yeah, it is.
I'll say that I do believe that there is no good without bad. So in a world, there will never always be peace. I just hope that we become better informed about how we fight and when it's appropriate. Yeah, to be a little bit more not self-deciding.
The history of Fulbright comes out of war, 1946. Fulbright is created, and the motto is swords into plowshares, taking the money that was gained out of World War II by America and investing it back into education. The first Fulbright commission was in Austria, which is not a coincidence, being the history of Austria post 1946. And there is also the slogan Ultima Ratio Regum, the last resort of kings, the last argument of kings, which was inscribed on French cannons as the final result of the failure of leadership. Well, if we can call monarchy leadership. In my own opinion, I'm not a monarchist, but this is a phrase that is shared, among Fulbright commissions still, Ultima Ratio Regum, the last resort, that Fulbright was and still remains an outcome of the 20th century in an attempt to undo war. But obviously your question is extending way beyond the 20th century, and wars have gone on since Sparta, so and before. So
I'll say how wars
something to
continue
meditate.
is propaganda.
Oh, yes.
We have this problem is that I think that poor leadership and the bad people turn the good people against each other.
Mm.
Mhm,
I mean,
yeah,
and even
Jen, in
ever
your
not have a
book,
bully in a classroom,
in your book, you write many places about the people who send people to war versus soldiers, and that you are often in these situations, like in The Feast, where you're thrown into a dinner party on a Saturday with warlords who are on the side of Saddam Hussein. These are supposed to be your enemies. Why are you eating dinner with them? Why are you dancing with them? What the hell? Pardon my French, but
Exactly.
I don't even know how to pose a question about what was going on. And the title of that chapter is fabulous. The lesser evil. The lesser evil. What you're like not the one who was sent. You were the one who was sent. You were not the one who did the sending. And there's something amiss. And it seems that, we can't really figure out who the lesser evil is. Is it Saddam Hussein, or is it the person sending you to war?
But then,
In this particular moment, it's like a complete head spin.
and I guess that's what is another reason for Ukraine about why I was just so moved by them, because at least in that time in 2014, it wasn't really a lesser evil. It was one evil. Like, they weren't being told who to fight. They were fighting. They knew in that moment, even though, but the people.
Yeah. And it seems right now in this particular moment, there's now a war going on in Israel. There's a war, in Iran. There's war, Syria. There's Ukraine. Are these things connected? I mean, when people pick up your book, immediately they're going to look for the connection. What is the connection between Afghanistan, Iraq, and Ukraine? And there's so much here to unpack that is more nuanced than any kind of parallel. You're not making just some simple parallel. You are really, in your experience, sharing your story. And I think that's what is so powerful about this book. As you said, it's a first-person testimonial. It's not mediated by propaganda and media, that people are invited to find their own connections.
Oh, look out.
What did you say?
I said it might be soon tore up by propaganda. No.
Yeah. We'll see the reception of the book. It's newly published, which is really exciting. We're really honored here at Fulbright to be hosting you early on in your trajectory. I really do envision a future Ukrainian edition. And I want to, again, see if there are any questions in our stream. Oksana, do we have any?
No, there are no questions. There are a lot of comments from Metro Lavrinchuk. I've shared them with you in our chat.
He's in the book.
Yeah, he asks for a book, and he says how he misses Jenn, and a lot of different facts that he mentioned were discussed by him. So it's obvious that he was a participant of the process. So you can read all the comments in the chat or on Facebook.
Don't worry, bye-bye. You are all over in the book.
And Metro Lavrinchuk has a question, but I have not seen the question yet. But there is also Dmitry Filipchuk, who actually wants to start reading the book as well. And we are waiting for Dmitry Lavrinchuk to write a question, because he has started doing it, but I have not received the question yet.
I have a question more for everyday folks like me, the humble ones, the non-soldiers who see how strong you and others are in this book and everything you've been through. Incredible moments like dropping down into Afghanistan in an airplane and pitch dark, except for a blinking red light. Like, what do you do to stay sane? There's so much going on right now. A lot of people are going insane. How do you stay sane? What do you do to be so resilient and so strong? What are your secrets? What can you tell the youth?
My question is, how do you know I'm sane? Running, jogging, and writing.
Right. Yes,
Photography.
writing.
It's cathartic.
Amazing. You're an artist. You're an artist, and throughout the book, you are, sustained. It seems really also by the voices that you're recording. You're able to do something to memorialize, to make lives eternal by sharing every moment with the families who possibly lost their loved ones. And I think that's really here also a testament to art and to what art does and what writing does. It memorializes, it keeps alive. I mean, this manuscripts don't burn is the phrase.
No.
It's here, it's documented, it's alive still. So I really admire and appreciate your work for that reason as well.
Historic documentation. These oral history stories need to, that's something I do want to say, they need to go somewhere, by the way, to be preserved,
Yes.
not just in my computer.
What are some of your ideas that you might be willing to share with us, or what are your general plans that you're working on?
For Americans, we have Library of Congress. They get documented and preserved forever. But I am looking for a place to, as long as everybody in the project is okay with it, of course. I'm looking for a place to give these stories, like they need to be in the hands of Ukraine.
Absolutely.
A digital black hole.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm really sorry about the comments, but the Facebook doesn't show me all the comments. So Dmytro has left the question and has sent the description where it is, but it doesn't open me.
Ask me later. Don't worry about him. Dima.
Sorry, yeah, because it shows the writing commands, but it shows only the last ones and nothing moves, unfortunately.
So there's a lot now, right in this particular moment, in America, a lot of discussion about Ukraine. Congress is back in session. For listeners out there who may be watching this recording later, call your representatives, let them know your thoughts, your support for Ukraine. Now is a really critical moment. Also, I would like to mention that all of our Fulbright programs are open for Ukrainians who are thinking about applying, and we're at the beginning of the application year. So you have your choice to apply to any 4 of our programs. We really, really encourage you to reach out to us even in advance, because we have workshops, we have meetups, we have a lot of different activities to help you to prepare your application. And we have also an amazing alumni community, which Oksana is representing here today and which is hosting this amazing event. Fulbrightsky Kolo, please reach out to Fulbrightsky Kolo also for small grants and resources to support your projects and your travel to conferences and other ideas you might have that you want to start with us. We're eager to support you, and we are now also not only in Ukraine, but we are all over. I mean, we have Fulbright alumni throughout Europe as well, and everyone is doing things to support one another. So let's keep our community strong. I want to thank everybody here today. I really, really especially want to thank Tanya for translating these selections on such short notice. And you did such a beautiful job in my limited Ukrainian. Yes,
I don't understand Ukrainian. It's so amazing to hear it in Ukrainian, to hear this. So thank you.
Thank you. And I have to come back to the question.
Yes.
Dmytro has ended. It's about the Russian side. How do you feel for them, and whether you understood them or not?
The Russian side, I'm not there.
Russian side in the book. That was the translation.
I can't say I understand the Russian side because I'm not there talking to them. I can understand that the propaganda is making monsters out of people. And I also think that when we say Russian, there's a lot of other international soldiers serving for Russia right now. Seriously, like mercenaries.
Yeah,
Thank you.
good. A direct and honest answer, and possibly more writing, more books can come out of that as well. It'll be very interesting to see how this book is received. We again look forward to seeing it in Ukrainian and circulating it in Ukrainian as well. So if there are no more questions, we'll have to adjourn, but I want to again underline how grateful we are to Ukrainian Fulbrightsky Kolo for hosting us today. And we look forward to seeing all of you in person next time. Slava Ukraini!
Героям слава. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope I meet you one day, Tanya.
Likewise. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks a lot to everyone.
Thank you. Дякуємо.
Yeah, everyone.